The only character you do need to know about is Patricia, who is the biggest mommy milker. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of July, and I will be also doing a bunch of book giveaways, including the Advanced Readers Edition of One Last Stop and 5 brand new hardcover books because Book of the Month is sponsoring this video. Book of the Month is a super popular and fast-growing online service for readers. Their mission is to promote new and emerging books to help readers discover new books that they love. Every month, their team vets hundreds of books and puts them together in a curated selection of new and early release titles so that you can spend less time researching and more time reading. They're also risk-free, so you can skip any month, anytime, and you will not be charged. This month, their book selection includes Damnation Spring, a literary debut about a family struggling to make ends meet in a logging town divided over the fate of its forest. The Inheritance of Orchidia Divina, an early release fantasy about a family receiving a magical inheritance. Not a Happy Family, a thriller about a wealthy family unraveling after their parents are murdered. Once There Were Wolves, a contemporary novel about a woman's journey to Scotland to save the wilderness. And The Heart Principle, a romance about an autistic woman who finds true love. Personally, I'll be reading The Heart Principle from this selection, so I'll be talking more about that book in my next wrap-up. Giveaway details will be in my description, but if you want these books guaranteed, you can sign up for your first box using my code READWithCindy for $9.99. This is an amazing deal for new hardcover fiction, so I highly recommend that you take this opportunity. The first book I read this month actually popped up on my radar because it was a previous Book of the Month selection, and that is Imposter Syndrome. The story follows 2 protagonists. One of them is a Russian spy. She is the CEO of a huge technology company in Silicon Valley, so everyone thinks she is the ultimate girl boss, not knowing that she is actually secretly working for Russia's largest intelligence agency, which you could argue is still pretty girl boss. The other protagonist is a first-generation Chinese American who is pretty much at the bottom of the corporate ladder. People always forget about her until they see her in the meeting and they're like, wait, who are you again? You work here? But one afternoon, she's performing a server check and she realizes there's been some unusual activity, which means that the company that she's working for does not have a rigorous privacy settings like they claim that they do, which is pretty similar to many technology companies today. But not only that, there's a person abusing the loophole, and that is the girl boss COO. And this is when the Asian girl starts to get suspicions that the other woman could be a spy. I ended up rating this book 3 stars because I feel like it stood in between a lot of different things without fully committing to either. Like, it was kind of just tiptoeing the line and standing in the middle of different genres like satire, thriller, mystery, even literary at some points, but it didn't really commit to any of them. So as a result, it wasn't really giving me anything. The setup is a great idea though. I like the idea of following 2 protagonists who both experienced misogyny in the industry for very different reasons. But I don't think these individual characters were deep enough for me to be fully engaged throughout the book. Maybe what would have helped me be more interested is if they actually lived up to the cat and mouse chase that they promised in the synopsis, because it really was not giving me anything. Even the Asian girl didn't really do much in the book. She truly lived up to her reputation, because sometimes even I forgot she was still there. I think I would have been much stronger if it were an actual spy thriller and we saw more interactions between those 2 protagonists. Not only would that have been more fun, I think it also would have drawn more parallels between the different problems or similar problems that they were facing within the industry. Also, imagine if this shit was sapphic. That shit would have made it so much better, even if it weren't written well. Just like a little taste of Killing Eve would have sealed the deal for me. Fortunately, I did get my sapphic thirst quenched with the next book that I finished, which was One Last Stop. This is a romance book that follows a girl who moves to New York City, but to her surprise, not only does she find a found family of a bunch of gay roommates instantly within the first place she lives in, but she also happens to meet a super hot Asian chick on the subway. Even within the first time that they meet, there was coffee spilled on the main character's scarf, and the hot Asian chick offers to give her her own scarf. This kind of kindness would not exist on the New York subway. That's just what makes her more special, because what kind of New Yorker would do that shit? Now, every time the main girl goes on the subway, she always sees that hot chick, and that becomes her subway crush. However, what she comes to discover when she sees a very old photograph from the 1970s, in which a woman in that photograph looks exactly like the hot woman on the train, train is that she thinks all Asians look the same. No, I'm just kidding. Can you imagine if that literally was the synopsis? She thinks there's this whole mysterious plot, but it turns out she was just being racist. Oops. The girl from the photograph is actually the same girl on the subway train, and it turns out that this mysterious hottie has been displaced in time from the 1970s, and she's literally stuck in the subway, and they both don't know why. That is the whole premise of the story, where the main girl tries to figure out how did this happen and how can they get her out of there. But also, what if they end up being attached to each other and they question, do they really want her to get out of there? But then what kind of life is it to be stuck on the New York fucking subway the whole time? That's literally hell, okay? If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out Subway Creatures on Instagram. That's like one of my favorite accounts on Instagram because you see just the most weirdest, disgusting shit, and I just can't help but stare at it the whole time. You see like a random lady eating mayonnaise straight from the jar. You see a guy holding a rat in his mouth. It's all kinds of characters, really. If only New York was as magical and fun and spontaneous like all of these stories make out to be. I'm just bitter because this shit would never happen to me. Like, I want to have my own love story with some hot chick on the subway, but instead I would probably be one of those people fighting with a rat to get the last slice of pizza because that's how hard it is to afford housing over there. I had reservations coming into it because I was afraid that the writing was gonna be hipster cringy, but surprisingly, I did enjoy their writing. I think Casey pulled it off well. I think they're a very strong writer. You can tell that they've lived through New York because there's a lot of unique and quirky details. There's a lot of love for the city. There's like this one part in the middle of the book where they end up having a drag party, and it was just so cute and wholesome. It really made me miss having a party with my friends, getting drunk, just having a good time. And I was just reading this shit, I'm like, damn, this shit actually makes me want to live my life. And so I actually go to New York subway and I see a dead pigeon. Then I'm like, oh, never mind. I think the moment where it might have gotten a little bit too cheesy for me was like when they were trying to raise money for a diner because the diner was about to close down. You know, just gentrification things. And they were like, man, we gotta band together and save this diner. And we're gonna do that by putting together our ragtag team of friends and hosting a charity drive. You're in charge of the posters and you're in charge of getting the markers, and we're all gonna band together and save the diner. And I was like, okay, maybe chill a little bit with this after school special because we're not in a Peanuts comic right now. But then it ended up making sense later for the plot, so I was like, oh, okay. I was gonna rate this 4 stars because I thought the story was very well done, but it was the last 1/3 of the book that really sealed the deal for me, and I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna rate it 5 stars because the last 1/3 ended up being so filled with emotion, and it was written really well because I got that immersive feeling of being swept up in it. Am I biased in feeling this way? Absolutely, because if this were a straight couple, I probably wouldn't care that much, but because of the fact that they're 2 women, I'm like, oh my god, yes, this is the one true love that you gotta chase after. I really like the idea of this sapphic, epic, fated, once-in-a-lifetime love. It was something that was very near and dear to my heart because a lot of the emotions and the themes that they were going through is similar to what I am trying to do in my current novel that I'm working on as well, between these 2 women characters who would never have met otherwise if it weren't for these very rare and unusual circumstances. And I think Casey just captured that feeling so well that it made me have a lot of envy and think to myself, I want to have this kind of emotion as well. It's a good sign when you're reading something and you're like, damn, like I gotta do something like that. I gotta convey it just like that. So it's just this very specific and niche concept that happened to be very relevant to what I'm trying to do right now, and that's why I'm biased. I just love that kind of relationship where it's like you never would have met, but you did for whatever reason. So in a way, it's like you 2 weren't supposed to be together, but you're here anyway, and it's like, oh, the emotions were just written so tenderly. It got me in my feels, and I was like, fuck, man, maybe I do want to fall in love. Fun little fact, I read most of this book while I was commuting on the train or on the bus. The first time I picked up this book while I was on the train though, I actually ended up missing my train 2 times, not because I was immersed in the story at that point, but just because I was stupid. And this is pretty much why I'll never meet my love interest. There could be a hottie out there that I was supposed to meet, but I never met them because I'm a dumbass that can't follow directions. Now let's talk about the questionably problematic problematic part, which I'm sure is what most of you clicked on because I decided to be a little clickbait bitch and put it in the title. There was some negative buzz around this book. There was a page that someone posted where the Asian girl was just dealing with some harassment on the subway train, which is very common from her experience as an Asian queer woman. She got the double whammy right there because it's like, damn, you gotta be gay and a person of color, and you had to deal with that shit since the 1970s. It's rough out there. You see, usually on the internet and especially on Twitter, people like to use their marginalizations as like a weapon to kind of bolster their social currency. But in the real world, that shit will just get you hate crimed. The main character, who as you can see is a white girl, tells her something along the lines of how it won't be as bad out there. So people had a problem with this excerpt because it just seems like a very ignorant thing for a white person to say, to be like, oh, it's not as bad out there. Like, it feels kind of invalidating. It almost implies that racism isn't as bad back then as it is today, or that racism isn't a thing anymore, whatever way you want to interpret it. I kind of feel like people took that line out of context, because when I finally got to that scene and I actually read more than just that single page that was shown in the screenshot, the whole point of this book is that the Asian girl has been stuck in the subway. I interpret it as more of just pointing out that what's going on in this New York subway is not a reflection of the rest of the city nor the world, because the subway is a totally different environment. It's like a hot box of anxiety and mess. It's like an alternate universe in itself where only bad things happen and you see like the worst kinds of people. So I brought the scene up to two other Asian girls who have read the book before, and I told them like my interpretation of the scene, and they said that that was how they interpreted it as well, that it was more talking about what it's like being trapped in the subway for years than implying that racism doesn't exist anymore. Even if you did interpret what the main girl said as something ignorant, the Asian girl snapped back at the main girl anyway, and she told her, you don't get it. Why are you always trying to fix everything when you don't understand what I'm going through? So it's not like the main girl was being unchallenged in the first place. Personally, I think even if a character does say something ignorant in a book, that's fine, because not every character is perfect, because characters are supposed to resemble human beings, and not every human being is perfect. Like, everyone has a cultural blind spot. And it would not have surprised me if the main girl actually did say something ignorant. And if she did, at least she was being challenged for it, which we clearly saw that she did, because the Asian girl was like, how about you sit down and shut the fuck up? If you are an Asian reader and you do have a problem with it, that's fine. If you are not an Asian, but you are really pissed off about this one excerpt and you wanted to take Casey down because they're such a terrible person, maybe like try to cool it and try to listen to other Asian people. My belief though is that anytime a screenshot of a page of a book gets spread over the internet for being problematic, it's up to you to decide if you no longer want to read the book. But I personally would prefer to get the full context and actually read the book for myself. And I would actually listen to the opinions of the actual marginalized people who are being affected rather than allies who are getting mad on Twitter. Moving on after that, I read Survive the Night. This is a thriller book that takes place in 1991. It follows this college student who is obsessed with movies, and she recently dealt with the tragedy of having her roommate murdered because there's been a serial killer going around on campus, and she decides it would be a great idea to get in a car with a stranger, because obviously when you hear about serial killers going around your campus, the logical thing to do would be to get in a car with a strange man. She meets this guy from a ride-sharing board, because something that college students do, something that I did actually when I was in college, is share rides with each other when they leave college to go back to their hometown. It's just an easy way to save money by splitting the gas. You don't have to buy the train tickets or flight tickets or whatever. So that's how she met this guy. And at first she assumes that he is a student that goes to her school, but there are some doubts that she starts to have throughout the car trip, because she notices that there are some holes in his story. Like, he'll say stuff about why he's driving back home to see his father, but then later when he mentions it, there are some details that change. So it's like, why aren't you getting your story straight? You know, that's kind of sus. So as the car trip continues, she starts to get more suspicious and paranoid that she might be driving in the same car as the campus killer. However, something to know about her is that she is so obsessed with movies to the point where sometimes she will see life as a movie. Like, she'll imagine things things that are happening that play out just like in a movie scene when they might not be happening. So she's kind of like stuck between not knowing if she should trust her instincts that this guy is sus as hell, or being skeptical of herself and reminding herself that she has a very overactive imagination and she might just be imagining things. I spontaneously picked up this book because one of my friends had just read it and he absolutely loved it, so I decided to pick it up. I had a lot of fun making jokes about the characters and the situations and texting my friend with updates and having theories about the plot twist. I would say it's like a palate cleanser because it's a very simple and straightforward thriller book. It's nothing deep, but if you just want something light and fun, this could be the book for you. However, I ended up rating it 3 stars because I don't think the quality of the book is great enough for me to rate it any higher. My main complaint about it is that the author overwrites everything. And I don't mean it in a descriptive way. I mean it in, it felt like he was just padding the book by describing literally every single action, every single feeling, every single gesture when it didn't need to be explained at all. It kind of just felt like he was doing it to make sure that the book is longer. I think good writing is knowing what to show and not show, being purposeful in what you don't describe, leaving room for nuance and for the imagination. And that is something that the writer did not do at all. So it was very uncreative and redundant. Also, a lot of the characters here had motivations that did not make sense to me. It felt like they were motivations for the sake of having this story. And the decisions that they made were just like, why? It was just very poor decision making. I'm sure that is not a surprise considering that the main girl literally decided to get in a car with a stranger despite knowing that there's a campus killer going around. But even that, like, I can try to explain away. Like, even if I had a serial killer on my campus, I probably would share a car ride too, just because I'm a cheap bitch. I'm talking about the other decisions that she made throughout the story where I was like, girl, what the fuck are you doing? Because of those things, I actually am going to make a separate video talking about Survive the Night. I feel like it would be fun to just recap a thriller story and make jokes about it along the way. I will reserve all of that stuff for a future video and we'll dive into how stupid these characters are and how some of these things just did not make any sense. The next book I read is much better, and that is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It is a horror novel that is about a book club formed by housewives who live in the South. And let me tell you, they do it differently in the South. The main character is Patricia, which is the ultimate mom name. She has given up her life as a nurse to stay at home to take care of her children and be a wife to her husband. Her life has just felt really small and not very exciting. The thing that she looks forward to the most is her book club that she has formed with other women in the neighborhood where they read exclusively true crime stories and thriller novels. The plot begins when she comes home late at night and there is this random lady that's just eating raccoons, as one does. And she's like, yo, what the fuck is going on? And then the lady charges at her and tries to take a bite out of her ear. And she recognizes the lady as one of the women that were part of the neighborhood. Not part of the book club, but just like this old lady who seemed normal until she started eating raccoons out of nowhere. The lady ends up hospitalized, but then she ends up dying. And because of that, the lady's nephew or grandson, I don't quite remember what his relationship was, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, that is how this new guy moves into the neighborhood and into this new house. And initially, Patricia is kind of like attracted to him because he is a handsome young man. However, once children around the neighborhood start to go missing, she begins to suspect that the new guy has something to do with it. So because she's been reading all these true crime books, she thinks, oh my God, like what if he's like another Ted Bundy? And she starts to do her own investigation. But what she begins to find out is a lot more sinister than she expected. Gee, I wonder what it could be based on the title alone. I guess we'll never know. I was buddy reading this with a friend and she had some trouble distinguishing the moms from each other because you do get introduced to a lot of characters. I feel like you don't really need to know all of them that well. The only character you do need to know about is Patricia, who is the biggest mommy milker, but it isn't her milk that this new guy is interested in sucking, if you know what I mean. Fun fact, since we were already talking about some author tea going on with Casey, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, well, maybe more of like a one-sided kerfuffle going on with Riley Sager, who was the author of the previous book I read, Survive the Night, and Grady Hendrix, who is the author of this book. Grady recently published a new book called The Final Girl Support Group, which based on the title and the synopsis is similar to a book that Riley Sager wrote called The Final Girls. And he was feeling a little bit petty. He tweeted something that was not so subtly shading Grady for having a similar story. He ended up deleting the tweet and apologizing for it, which I'm glad he did. I bring this up because at the same time that this happened, I happened to have been reading his book and then Grady's book back to back in a row. So because Riley brought this up, I couldn't help but compare. I started reading Southern Book Club's guide. I was like, wow, Grady's writing is really good. No wonder Riley Sager doesn't like him. I find subtweeting to be very petty behavior, but I think it is rooted in insecurity. They are both white men who are writing thriller books. I would assume that Riley probably felt threatened and maybe insecure about his own writing to the point where you see another author write a similar book and then you feel threatened enough, despite being an established author yourself, that you would have to tweet that. I get the insecurities now, Riley. I understand now why you're comparing yourself to him, because his writing is just like really fun and stylistic. There's definitely a lot more flavor, a lot more character. I ended up rating it 4 stars because it was just a fun read. There's a lot of gross, gnarly scenes that happen, like the lady eating raccoons. There's another part where roaches and spiders are crawling all over a character and you're just like, ew, but then you keep on reading. What I like the most about this book is that it focuses on moms, which I think is cool to do in a horror novel. Because if you think about it, it's really the housewives that would be the best at cleaning up messes, cleaning up blood. They know how to leave a clean trail and not get caught. Without getting into details about what this new guy does, I found him to be the most abhorrent character I've read all year. His actions were so vile and awful. I was like, oh, I hate this man. I'm like, please, the MILFs gotta band together and just kill this asshole because I'm so over him. One of the things that I was kind of disappointed by was that the other women in the book club were not really involved in the plot. For the most part, we really just follow Patricia going on a solo mission. But I was like, dude, this is a fucking book club. We gotta get all the women rising up together to defeat this bitch. Especially because in the beginning of the book, when you see the book club form, it's really sweet to see how they come together and how they support one another. So I was hoping to see that more consistently throughout the book, especially when shit was going down. There was a lot of skepticism and distrust towards one another, and I was disappointed by that because I think it would have been more compelling and fun if we had really seen them as a team. Another thing that I think would have made the book better is if another character had been the protagonist instead. So this other character is named Mrs. Green. She is a Black woman who lives in a poor neighborhood, and she is the one who has been saying that bad shit has been happening with all these kids getting snatched up. So she was really the underdog of the story, and she was calling everybody out. When people didn't help her, she was calling them out. When they eventually helped her, she still called them out because she was like, so you only want my help now that it's affecting you. I wish that we had just read this book from her point of view because she was the most sympathetic character. She really did like all the hard work here. They paid Mrs. Green so dirty. On one hand, I do think it is realistic for a bunch of white moms to not listen to the Black character who's pointing out that all of these kids are missing. So I do understand that that's how life is. It's making me think, well, why did they have to be the main characters? Why do I have to root for them when they didn't do shit for such a long time until something bad happened to them? But because Mrs. Green was a side character who was the person pointing out that all of these Black kids were getting snatched up, I feel like we only got a surface level mentioning of how race and class plays into these awful things that are happening, but we don't really have that explored because, again, all of it is funneled in a side character. So overall, it was a fun book, but it definitely could have been better and it could have been way deeper. Finally, the last book that I read is The Chosen and the Beautiful, which is a Great Gatsby retelling, but instead of the perspective of Nick, we follow the perspective of Jordan, who is also a queer Asian immigrant. So in the book, Jordan is enjoying the glitz and glamour of 1920s. However, despite having money and education, a lot of people see her as more of of an exotic attraction, and a lot more doors are closed on her. We follow pretty much the entire story of The Great Gatsby from her perspective, but there is a little bit of a fantasy element because she learns about some magical powers that she has, and that gets tied to her heritage as well. I rate this 3 stars because even though I found the writing to be really beautiful and lyrical, I still wanted a lot more from the book. I felt like there was a disconnect between the story trying to be a Great Gatsby retelling versus a story trying to also expand with more fantasy. In my opinion, the most interesting thing to explore would be the main character's heritage and her magic, because that's something different, right? Like, we already know what The Great Gatsby is about. We have already seen the story through an observer's point of view. So if we were to learn more about Jordan and what her story is, that would have been way more compelling. But unfortunately, she felt like a side character to her own book. It really felt like she was just a passive character the whole time because she was just observing everything and we didn't really get to see her do much for herself. I think you could argue that maybe the author was trying to do it that way because that's how Nick was in the original Great Gatsby. But for me, that's not really enough for me to want to enjoy a story. I think when you decide to do a retelling, you gotta shake things up more. Something has to be subverted, something has to be revealed, and it should be able to stand as its own. I do think maybe if someone really loves The Great Gatsby, they could appreciate this book more because from what I have guessed, it seems to be a very accurate, almost play-by-play retelling of The Great Gatsby, like very similar scenes to it. But again, I want more. I want to see her as an active main character with her own story. I don't care about her observations of all the other white characters. Like, come on, dude. Especially because The Great Gatsby, it has the whole theme about the American dream and how it's kind of all a farce. Imagine how powerful that would be if that were paralleled through the story of a queer Asian immigrant. So those are all the books I read in July. I will see you next time for August. Go ahead and unsubscribe from my channel, and goodbye.